Reading Festival. It's sponsored by the Roosevelt Library and the Friends of the Poughkeepsie Public Library District. We're looking forward to our 4 sessions today featuring authors of recently published books on Hudson Valley history. After each of the sessions, you'll be able to buy these fine books at our New Deal store, and the authors will be there to sign them for you. But before I introduce the author for this session, I just want to remind you that on June 30th, we are rededicating the Roosevelt Library and opening an exciting, innovative, and interactive permanent museum exhibit. I sincerely hope you'll return with friends and family to visit our new exhibit. I promise you an amazing journey into the lives and times of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, and we have a little sneak preview for you today.
This is the last chance you've got to see this library free of charge.
So, thank you for listening to my commercial. We do hope you'll come back. It's going to be a very exciting time for us. But now it is my pleasure to introduce our first author. Anthony Musso was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Following a tour of duty in the United States Army, he attended Nassau Community College and Hofstra University, while at the same time beginning a 38-year career with the Postal Service. A writer and editor for several publications throughout his career, working for the postal headquarters, he also served as media spokesman and editor of an 85,000 circulation monthly magazine. In addition to his government service, Musso worked as a freelance correspondent for the Times Herald-Record in Middletown, New York. His first book, FDR and the Post Office, was released in 2005 and was followed by a 2-volume book, Setting the Record Straight, the music and careers of recording artists from the 1950s and 1960s in their own words. The later project was based on personal interviews Musso conducted with 100 top recording artists from that era. His latest book, Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley, features 55 sites throughout upstate New York region that, while not widely known, boast significant ties to, among other things, the American Revolution, early American industry, and local and national politics. He has resided in the Hudson Valley since 1986 and has been a great friend of the Roosevelt Library for many years, and it is my pleasure to welcome Tony.
Thank you very much. Thanks for getting up so early on a Saturday morning. Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley. What I did with this book, the motivation for this book, is, everyone knows the FDR Library and the Vanderbilt Mansion, and every time I get guests, like Lynn said, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so I get a lot of out-of-town guests, and they always want to come to the FDR home or the Vanderbilt Mansion. And I try to take them to some lesser-known sites, too, and we're going to get into a little bit of how I got motivated to write this book. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. Normally, this presentation is 60 minutes, so we're going to be buzzing along. If you see a big hook come out and get me, it means I overstayed my 35-minute talk. I was trimming and trimming last night. I'm probably going to show you about 10 sites out of the 55 that are in the book, and know that I'm giving you just very fast bullets. There's a lot more history on each site in the book. The first slide that I'm going to put up, believe it or not, is not a hidden treasure, and it's not in the book. And you might say, well, he's lost his mind. He's starting his presentation with something that's not a hidden treasure. There's two reasons why I'm starting with the Vanderbilt Mansion, which is an obvious iconic site in this area. One is that I was coming out of the Vanderbilt Mansion with some guests one day for probably my 40th visit. And when I got out to the parking lot, just looking at the license plates in the parking lot, West Virginia, Vermont, Pennsylvania, I just thought to myself that, I know of these, there's at least 3 or 4 other lesser-known sites within a 10-minute drive of the Vanderbilt, and I wonder if these people who made this long, long drive to get here would be interested in going. And the other side of the coin is, for local people, I wrote the book in a sense where you can read about these different sites and take a day trip. And in this economy, I'm happy to say that the vast majority of the sites in this book are free by donation or a very nominal fee to get in. So that's kind of important today, too, in this economy. The second reason I'm starting with the Vanderbilt Mansion is I want to illustrate how close these hidden treasures are to the mainstream sites like the FDR and Vanderbilt Mansion. So if you'll walk across the lawn with me, straight out to Route 9, there's that stone wall on Route 9, and you look right across the street, and you'll see our first hidden treasure. You're going to be amazed at some of the sites you see today, because if you're local, you probably pass them every day and don't give a second thought about stopping in. St. James Church was the dream of Dr. John Bard. He lived in the area in Hyde Park during the mid-1700s. He is actually the one that named this town. He named the town after Edward Hyde, who was the governor of the colony of New York at the time. And his dream was to have a church in the town. He always wanted to have a church. Well, unfortunately, John Bard died in 1799, never seeing that dream come to fruition. His son Samuel Bard, also a physician, wanted to pay tribute to his father and to jumpstart the project of getting a church put up in the town. He donated the southern portion of the Bard homestead. Their house would have been located just north of the church. It's no longer standing. Well, when the land was donated, they put up the first church, the one prior to this one, in 1811. Now, the problem they had with that church is over the first 20 years, it was found to be structurally unsound because the rector, who I understand by all accounts was a wonderful rector, but he had no architectural background, and he designed the church. And before the roof came in on the congregation, they thought they'd take it down and put this one up, and this one was consecrated in 1844. Now, the historical tie with this is that Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were both members of the congregation here. So whenever visitors came from around the country or around the world, they would accompany the Roosevelts to services here on Sunday. Undoubtedly, the most famous of all those ceremonies was in 1939 when the King and Queen of England came. They were the first British monarchs ever to visit this country. And they accompanied the Roosevelts to services here. I tracked down, to get the most accurate information, I tracked down a woman named Anna May. She lives up in Rhinebeck. She's 104 years old and as sharp as a tack. She led the choir for that ceremony. and gave me a very detailed account of that ceremony and what went on. And of course, that visit was known for the hot dog picnic up at Top Cottage, which was the house that Roosevelt designed. That is a separate chapter in the book, and I'll try to sneak those separate chapters in, even though I'm not talking about them, just to give you a sense of what's in the book. Now, if you do visit this church, and this church is open all day long for daylight hours, so you can just walk in, look for the plaque right to the right of the altar that honors Franklin Roosevelt, but it doesn't honor him because he was president. He was a longtime vestryman at this church. He was a senior warden. And in doing research of this church, I found that they really tried to plan the church meetings when Roosevelt was going to be in town so that he could participate. He was a very active participant. And he was actually baptized in St. James Chapel, which is right on Market Street across from the Hyde Park Post Office. So a lot of history there. Now, you can see the backside here, the graveyard, the St. James graveyard. I would encourage you to go and take a walk through that graveyard. You will see a lot of the names that really helped to form this whole region. You'll see names like Livingston. You'll see Morgan Lewis's grave. There was a mausoleum against the back wall that looked very familiar to me the first time I went in the graveyard, and I didn't understand why. And when I went back, it was the grave of Ogden Mills, and his mausoleum looks like a miniature Mills mansion. So now right inside the entrance and under a large tree in this area here is the Bard family. And the portion of land that John Bard's son donated included his father's grave. So when the church went up and the graveyard was established, John Bard became the first inhabitant. And that's how, I guess, the tribute was paid to him. Now for the next site, we're going to jump up to Millbrook, New York. This is along Route 343, just south of the village of Millbrook, and is the Nine Partners Quaker Meeting House. This building was built in 1780, and at the time it was put up, Dutchess County had the distinction of having the second largest population of Quakers in the country. The first was in Philadelphia, which is where the Society of Religious Friends is based. So Dutchess County had a very, very strong presence of Quakers in the area. This was also, this particular site, the epicenter of the abolitionist movement in the region. And in its heyday, you would have seen huts all around the meeting house where fugitive slaves were coming and going, a very transient community. From here, they would go up to Vermont or up to the Finger Lakes region where there was other Quaker settlements, and they would help them to get further north, some into Canada, to gain their freedom. Now, just to the east of the meeting house, no longer standing but marked with a historical marker, was the Nine Partners School. And in that school, the children learned in their book the ills of slavery, how it was wrong and how it should be abolished. But when you think about it, outside of their formal training, all they had to do was look out their window, and they would have seen firsthand what was going on here with the fugitive slaves. It had a very profound influence on them. And one man that graduated from that school became one of the most active station masters in the Underground Railroad. His name was Daniel Anthony. If you're not familiar with Daniel Anthony's name, you're certainly familiar with his daughter, Susan B. Anthony. So you could see how that influence transformed down through the generations. Just up the road west of this is still standing the home of the headmaster of the school, Jacob Willits, who was a very, very well-respected abolitionist back in the days, and that home is also marked by a blue historic marker. Now, the Hudson Valley was a very big part, played a very big part in the American Revolution. And for the next site, we're going to go down to Fishkill, New York. This is on the east side of Route 9, just south of Interstate 84, the Van Wyck Homestead. If these trees were not in bloom here, you would probably see cars whizzing by eastbound going to Danbury. That's how close it is to 84. This house was almost torn down when 84 was put up. to put an entrance ramp onto 84. And a group of concerned citizens came together, actually formed the Fishkill Historical Society to save this building. And today they still maintain this building and they open it free of charge. It's one of those sites that has a donation jar there, but it's free of charge. They give you a tour of the home and it's a wonderful property. The historical value of it is the home was built in 1737 by Cornelius Van Wyck. And when I say the home, just this portion was built. In 1757, he added this large center hall Dutch colonial to the house. When the American Revolution broke out, George Washington personally commandeered this house to serve as headquarters for the Fishkill Supply Depot. And on the property around the house, there were between 2,000 and 4,000 Continental Army troops stationed there. Now, why was this so important? Well, the British were desperately trying to split the colonies. There were two ways they can get up into the Hudson Valley. One was along the Hudson River, but the Continental Army felt that they had the river secured with strategically placed forts, and they actually put the chains across the river in the area of Garrison and West Point. This area, the only other way they can come up was by foot. And this area included the Wickapee Pass, where the British Army could come through the Wickapee Pass and infiltrate the Hudson Valley. Well, that Wickapee Pass went right by this property. So by putting 4,000 troops there, they blocked it off. Now, we all know that the waterway, the Hudson River, didn't work out too well for the Continental Army because the British eventually did get up into the area and they burned down a good portion of the city of Kingston. On the other hand, this area never saw conflict, never saw any aggression at all. Now, in addition to its part in the American Revolution, this house in particular inspired a book by renowned American author James Fenimore Cooper. The book was called The Spy, A Tale of a Neutral Ground. Has anyone read that book? It's kind of a dry read, but it's a very interesting read. It's a true story about a double spy named Enoch Crosby. Enoch Crosby was a patriot, and he used to infiltrate the loyalist groups. On one occasion, he was detained by a Continental Army faction that did not know of his status as a double spy. He was put under a mock trial right in this room here, and then he was allowed to escape because they knew he was a patriot and he was doing his business on behalf of the patriots. Now, if you visit the Fishkill, this Fishkill site, which is open from May to October every weekend, you might want to make it a little half day or a three-quarter day trip. I would go up Route 9 about a mile until you come to the intersection of Route 9 and Route 52, which is Main Street in the village of Fishkill. On the west side of Route 9 is the Dutch Reformed Church. That was converted into a military prison during the Revolutionary War, and that's where they detained Enoch Crosby before he went on trial here. On the east side of Route 9 is Trinity Church. Trinity Church was converted into a military hospital during the war. In fact, many of the local residents used to call it Smallpox Hospital because that's what a lot of the troops were treated there for. So it's a very historic area in that Fishkill. Now, when I was putting the book together, I really tried to get some sites where you can go with the kids. It could be a family outing or whatever. And I found one site up on Quaker Hill in Pauling. Now, Quaker Hill, I have a few sites in the book. One of them is the Oblong Friends Meeting House. That was the very first Quaker meeting house that was ever put up in 1767 in Dutchess County. Right down the road from that, you'll find this building, the Akin Free Library. Now, if anyone is familiar from the area, I don't know how many local people are here, but if you're familiar with the Caneen Hackett Arts Center in the city of Poughkeepsie, this building will look very familiar to you, and that's because the designer was the same designer as the Caneen Hackett Arts Center. Understand that the Caneen Hackett Arts Center today was originally built as the Vassar Institute. The Vassar brothers put it up. The architect was James A. Wood, and he had just finished doing the Vassar Brothers Institute in Poughkeepsie and used the exact same design on the Akin Library on Quaker Hill. There's only two differences. Number one, the Vassar Institute in Poughkeepsie was done with red brick. This was done with stone. The second difference is the Vassar Institute ends right here. And so for the Akin Library, they added this dome with the clock tower and pierced. And that is the only two differences. Otherwise, the buildings are exact replicas. This building was financed by Albert Akin. He was a very, very successful businessman in Pauling. He founded the Bank of Pauling, and he was very instrumental in getting the railroad to come up to Pauling. In addition to putting this building up, he put up the famous Mizentop Hotel, which is no longer standing. If you're familiar with the Mohonk Mountain House in New Paltz, that was kind of a close thing to what the Mizentop was. It was a very high-scale resort. It overlooked the whole valley. It was a beautiful hotel. And he also put up the Akin Hall. He had the Akin Hall Association. His idea was that he wanted to have these buildings to have lectures, regular lectures, and they can conduct non-denominational religious services in them. The library was put up for different reasons. Obviously, he had lectures in here, but he also wanted world-class museums. Now, the construction of this building started in 1898. And unfortunately, right after the construction started, Albert Akin fell pretty seriously ill, and he would visit it on occasions, but he gave $100,000 to this project, and he put the project in the hands of the Akin Hall Association members. Well, unfortunately, there was a lot of infighting on how to properly spend this $100,000, and it took a full 10 years for this building to be completed. And they went through various architects and different suppliers of stone and different things. When the building finally opened in 1908, Albert Akin had died in 1903, and he never saw this building finished. The thing about the Akin Library and the Mizentop Hotel, which was really the demise of the Mizentop Hotel, is neither building has ever been fitted with heat. Obviously, for the hotel, that was a real major thing because they had to close down at the end of October, and they just could never make money to make it a worthwhile venture, so they eventually tore the building down. This building is open from April until late October, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Again, free of charge. It's Akin Free Library. And I have to tell you, I was amazed when it first went up here. It's unbelievable to see what they have in this building. First of all, living right down the road from this library was legendary broadcast journalist Lowell Thomas. And they have an entire room devoted to Lowell Thomas memorabilia. All the memorabilia from his radio and television broadcasts and everything is very interesting. There is one room in this museum, in this library, that has Quaker exhibits and artifacts, because this is where the Quaker community started in Dutchess County, and they have a lot of documents there. People actually go here from outside the area to research Quaker history. The Historical Society of Quaker Hill and Pauling has the whole top floor as a museum of regional area. It's like going into one big museum with a lot of smaller subjects. Perhaps, well, not perhaps, definitely, the biggest attraction of this library, and it's so little known in the area, is this bottom level here is a world-class natural history museum. Olive Gunnarsson was a very well-to-do woman. She owned an estate in Pauling. And she got very interested in natural history, and she started collecting a lot of artifacts. Today, I think we would see Olive Gunnarsson on the reality show Hoarders. She had such a massive collection. Fortunately, she had enough money to house it. She built 3 huge barns on her estate to house this collection. And when she passed away, she left it in her will to the Akin Library. So they're always changing up the exhibits. If you were a child growing up in Pauling, you would be going here every year on a field trip. But, I live right here in LaGrange and really never knew the depth of this collection and all the things in this library. And again, it's free. It's open from 10 to 4, May to October. And so that's the Akin Free Library. Now, I have two children, 31 and 26, and they're always, as we know, our children know more than us. They think so anyway. And my daughter's always giving me advice. And she said, Dad, you wrote a book on FDR and the post office, and he died in 1945. Then you wrote a book on rock and roll about Buddy Holly and the Crickets, whoever they are. She's 26. She said, if you want to be a popular author, you have to write about love or scandal. So I put 2 scandals in my book to appease my daughter, and I'm going to show you the more national scandal now. This is the gatehouse of an estate that was put up called Danheim. It was established in 1890 by Charles Dietrich. Charles Dietrich was a man who established a business that eventually evolved into Union Carbide. So he had great wealth, and he put this massive estate up. Now, the grounds feature a lake, cottages, barns. One building has nothing in it but 2 bowling alleys, and it has an all-wood Queen Anne manor that is absolutely outstanding. When Charles Dietrich died in 1927, Margaret Hitchcock bought the estate. Margaret Hitchcock is from the Mellon family, as in Mellon Bank. No problem there with money. The way the story goes is that one of Margaret Hitchcock's sons, Tommy, met and developed a relationship in 1960 with Dr. Timothy Leary. And now it all starts sliding downhill. In 1963, when Harvard University fired Dr. Leary for advocating the use of LSD, Tommy Hitchcock offered him use of this estate for $500 a month. And for the next 5 years, Dr. Leary was stationed right on this place. He lived in the Queen Anne Manor. In fact, in 1964, he wrote his very famous book, The Psychedelic Experience, while living here. Of course, the estate quickly became the site of endless parties, drug explorations. There were hippies living in tents all around the lakes, playing music. He got very high-profile visitors. Beat poet Allen Ginsberg was a frequent guest. Jazz musicians Charles Mingus and Maynard Ferguson were always here. On one occasion, a school bus pulled right up to this gatehouse, except it wasn't painted yellow. If you remember the late 60s, it was painted psychedelic colors, and it had 2 speakers on the roof blaring rock and roll music. Now, if you know anything about Millbrook, it's peaceful pastures and horse country, and I can only imagine that the people in the area were pulling their hair out. Well, on the bus were the Merry Pranksters, and they were authors, famous authors and artists that traveled around the country just partying all the time. They were led by Ken Kesey, who actually wrote One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. Now the bus went right through this gate, parked on the property, and they stayed there for an entire week. I searched and searched and searched. I didn't find one documentation of anything that happened during that week. I really don't think they remember that week. If you know the old expression, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there, that was the Merry Pranksters. Well, this presence in Millbrook, of all places, was really causing a lot of stress to the businessmen and especially to the parents whose children, they didn't want their teenagers drifting into this place. So one police raid after another started occurring. The most famous happened in 1966 when then Assistant District Attorney of Dutchess County, G. Gordon Liddy, who went on to Watergate fame, led the raid. And at that point, Margaret Hitchcock had had enough. She evicted Leary. The hippies were tossed off with their tents, and it went back to being a peaceful estate. But quite a story there. I want to show you one more site on this side of the river before we jump over. And I should tell you, while the majority of the book are sites in Dutchess County, I also have sites in Columbia, Ulster, and Orange County. And to kind of make it easy for day trips and everything, at the end of each chapter, I include a physical address, because I know people like to use GPS. If there's a site that's off the beaten path, like the next site we're going to look at, I give you exact directions, how to find a site, even tell you where to park your car so it's safe, and we'll move on from there. We're going to Dover Plains, New York. And this is the Dover Stone Church. Now, this place has got historic value because in 1637, to escape the attack of the English, Manshitucket Indian Chief Sassacus led his Connecticut tribe of Native Americans into this geological formation of metamorphic rock. The natural entrance of the Dover Stone Church is how it got its name, because it resembles a stained glass window in a traditional church. This site gained significant interest back in the 1830s when an article about it ran in the Family Magazine. It's located a half a mile off of Route 22, and from what I understand, it's only been in the last year and a half or so that a sign was on the road, because I first learned about it from the historian of Dover who told me about it, and I took my camera and went out there. She kind of pulled a gag on me. She told me to go see the Dover Stone Church because she knows I do photography as a hobby, and dopey me, I was expecting a Gothic steeple with a bell, and this is what I found. It's a wonderful site, though. It might not look it in this picture, but there is a path on the side where you can get into the grotto. It's 24 square feet inside. About 100 years ago or more, a boulder fell from the top, and instead of landing sideways, it landed upright, so they appropriately named it the pulpit. Now, behind the pulpit, you could almost see a little of it. There's a 30-foot waterfall. And I was in here on a sunny day when I've made a couple of trips out here, and I was in there during a sunny day, and there's a crevice in the top of the roof of the grotto, and the sun just cascades in. It's just unbelievably beautiful in there. This is on 58 and a half acres that was privately owned until 2002. When the owner put it up for sale, the town of Dover bought it. And they've really done a terrific job with it. I don't want you to think this is a rugged hike getting out here. It's more of a nature walk. And the only tricky hill that I encountered, there was a little hill you had to go down. It was a little wet from rain. The town of Dover has accommodated everyone by putting concrete steps and railings to get down that hill. The rest is a piece of cake. It's just a walk through a meadow and through some woods. And they've actually put some picnic tables out here. So I encourage people all the time, if you're going to go visit it, bring a picnic lunch, and then you could drive just north of here to Wassaic, and there's another chapter in the book on the 1861 Borden's Milk Factory, which you can see up in Wassaic. There's a couple of different sites up there, and it's very near to this site. So that is the Dover Stone Church. We're going to jump across the river now, and we're going to start in Kingston. We're going to start in Kingston and in the Rondout District. Now, while most of us know that the Rondout District today is very nice restaurants and boutiques and art galleries, you could see from the buildings here, in the 1820s, this was the southern terminus of the 108-mile D&H Canal, the Delaware and Hudson Canal. Two brothers who had a coal operation up in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, built this 108-mile canal down to the Hudson River to get their coal to the Hudson River. And when they did that, they converted this area from a very sleepy farming community into a very major shipping port. Just one real fast story. I give a little narrative about the more important buildings in the district. This particular building right here with the fish hanging on is now Mariners Harbor Restaurant. This was called the Sampson Building back in the 1830s, 1840s. And they were famous. They had a department store, Sampson's Department Store, on the first floor. And they were famous for having live monkeys entertain the children while the parents shopped. I've suggested that to Walmart and Fishkill 4 times. They keep throwing me out. On the top floor was Sampson's Opera House, where they had community theater and shows all year round. And it's just a wonderful place to visit, and then you could also have a nice meal there. There's a lot of art galleries and restaurants in the area. I'm running out of time, so I'm really going to breeze these next few sites. This is just south of Kingston, and it's the Esopus Meadow Lighthouse. All I'll tell you about this site is that this site was once, because it is living quarters inside. There's a kitchen, a living room. Upstairs there's 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. Because we used to have lighthouse keepers who lived there and took care of the light all the time. Unfortunately, in 1939, the Coast Guard took over all the lighthouses and they automated them, which was good in one way. They saved money, but in another way, without a light keeper right there to maintain the building, they were all falling in disrepair. This lighthouse was actually listing and ready to fall into the Hudson River. And in the 1990s, a group of concerned citizens got together. They've been restoring it. You can now go to the Kingston-Ronnow district and get a boat and go out and visit it. They've restored the inside, and they're making the first floor into a museum of lighthouses on the river. This is also the last wooden lighthouse on the Hudson River, so it's kind of an important structure. Okay, let's see. We got time, Cliff? Okay. This is south of the Esopus Lighthouse. It's a place called Slabsides. It's in West Park, New York. It's off of Route 9W. Again, this is one of those sites that doesn't have a physical address. I give you an exact route to get into this place. This is the rustic cabin of American naturalist and essayist John Burroughs. John Burroughs moved to West Park in 1874. He purchased a 9-acre pig farm right on the Hudson River, converted it into an estate. 11 years later, he moved in from the estate 1.5 miles into the woods, and with his son, he built this cabin. It's called Slabsides because of the rough bark on the outside of the cabin. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, you have an estate on the Hudson River, and you build this little cabin where he lived from April to November every year. Well, you have to understand that on one side of his estate, he had the West Shore Railroad constantly going by. The Hudson River in those days was like the New York State Thruway, steamboats, whistles. First of all, he was a naturalist. He wanted to be in nature. Second of all, he was a writer, and he had no peace to write. So he built this cabin, and he would live here from April to November and then go back to his estate at Riverby on the Hudson River from November to April. He had a very long marriage, a very happy marriage. It was 6 months a year. His wife refused to live here. While he did live in this cabin, he was visited by Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and on one occasion, President Teddy Roosevelt came up in the presidential yacht, tied up his yacht at Riverby, and took a horse and buggy to visit him here. Now, John Burroughs died in 1921. This cabin now sits in the middle of 190 acres of hiking trails. It's open 365 days a year. And 2 times a year, the John Burroughs Association opens this building. It's in May and October, so it's coming up, and you can go in the cabin and view it. Again, everything free of charge. The website for the John Burroughs Association is at the end of chapter, so you can check their website and see what date it is in May. And I'm going to close one last one real fast. This is down in Marlborough, New York. The Gomez Mill House. It was built in 1714 by Louis Moses Gomez as a trading post for Indians and settlers. It has the distinction of being the oldest Jewish home in North America. It was also the first paper mill in the area through a subsequent owner. And there was also a patriot that lived here who used to run militia orders to George Washington, and he held Whig activities in this. Ironically, just last night, I got a message. This property was destroyed, not the home, but the property was destroyed by Hurricane Irene. And as luck would have it, I just got an email last night. This is reopening. It's been closed for renovations. It reopens May 5th, and it'll be open for the season. They give wonderful tours through here, and then you can walk through the property and see the mill properties and everything. And now, I hope I didn't go too long. We'll open it up for some questions. No questions. Cliff, I could talk another 60 minutes here. Yes.
On the house on the river, get that picture back.
The house on the lighthouse?
Yeah. What is that structure on the right?
The pole?
No.
The house?
On the right. On
Like
the right.
the telephone pole that's up there?
No. Not on the house, but on the river. There's a structure, a white structure. That one.
That's a
Right.
house. That's a private house.
Just a private house.
Yes, that's Port Ewan. This is Port Ewan up here.
Okay.
And that's the Catskill Mountains in the background.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, this one too, I can give you a little extra since there's not many questions. This lights, it's 53 feet above the water. And the reason they needed this was that to warn mariners of the mud flats that are in here, and they're called the Esopus Meadows, and that's why the name of the lighthouse, the Esopus Meadows Lighthouse. Any other questions?
Marist College has an archive of Lowell Thomas information. How does that compare with the other site that you mentioned in Pauling?
Yeah, well, they have a building, I believe, the Lois Thomas Building, Marist College, don't they? Yeah. I think I covered that when it opened for the Poughkeepsie Journal. I never really saw the archive there, but I can tell you they have a lot more personal items at Akin Hill because Lowell Thomas was devoted to Quaker Hill. He lived there his whole career. He's actually the one that got Governor Thomas Dewey to move to Quaker Hill. Edward R. Murrow lived on Quaker Hill. It was a very tight-knit group up there, and he donated, his family donated a lot of his personal archives to the Akin Library. So I can't really compare them, though. Anyone else?
All right, folks, we're going to take a 15-minute break in here, but Tony will be out front signing copies of his books. If you'd like to get a book signed, we're selling the book in the bookstore as well. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.